Drop. Drop the wire. I said, drop it right now, or I swear on my son's grave I will bury you right here under this fence post. The scream tore through the humid, suffocating air of the Kansas afternoon, causing the blackbirds on the telephone line to scatter into the gray, oppressive sky, while the man holding the tool froze like a statue carved from fear. Please make sure to watch until the very end, because the twist in this encounter will completely overturn everything you think you know about the hatred between enemies in World War II, and how a simple piece of metal changed a life. It was late October, 1944, and the war was not just raging in the muddy trenches of Europe or the islands of the Pacific. For Silas, a 60-year-old farmer with a failing heart and calloused hands, the war was right here in his barley field. Silas was exhausted, his body broken by 3 years of doing the work of 4 men, since his own boys had shipped out to the European theater, leaving him alone with the dust, the debt, and the deafening silence of an empty house. The government had sent him help in the form of the enemy. German prisoners of war, transported from the scorching sands of North Africa to the heartland of America to harvest crops, because there were simply no young American men left to do it. To Silas, they weren't men. They were the monsters he heard about on the crackling evening radio. The faceless jackboots marching over civilization, and now they were standing in his dirt, breathing his air and holding his tools. Among the group was a prisoner named Dietrich, a man of few words with hollow cheeks and eyes that looked like shattered blue glass, who moved with a stiff, mechanical efficiency that made the hair on the back of Silas's neck stand up. The tension on the farm was a physical weight, heavier than the grain sacks they hauled. A silent, suffocating pressure that threatened to snap with the slightest provocation, fueled by Silas's grief and the propaganda posters plastered in town. On this particular Tuesday, the crisis wasn't the artillery shelling overseas, but a catastrophic failure of the western fence line that threatened to let the prize dairy cut loose onto the county road, where military supply trucks barreled past at 50 miles an hour. Silas had the wooden cedar posts, and he had a spool of precious, rusted barbed wire scavenged from the back of the barn, but he had discovered something that made his stomach drop into his boots. The mason jar of metal fencing, staples the thick, U-shaped nails, absolutely essential for tacking the wire to the wood, was empty, likely kicked over and lost in the tall grass during the chaos of the last storm. Without staples, the wire was useless, just a sharp metal snake lying in the dirt. And without the fence, Silas's livelihood would wander onto the highway and be destroyed, bankrupting him in a matter of minutes. He stood there, gripping his heavy wrench until his knuckles turned white, cursing the metal shortages, cursing the war, and cursing the silent Germans who were watching his desperation with what he interpreted as cold amusement. That was when Dietrich stepped forward, his boots crunching loudly on the dry corn stalks, and reached his dirty, scarred hand toward the spool of barbed wire lying at Silas's feet. Silas flinched violently, his grip tightening on the iron wrench, his mind instantly flashing to the warnings he had heard at the general store about sabotaged sleeper agents and sudden violence from these prisoners. "Don't touch that," Silas growled, his voice trembling not with anger, but with a sudden, spiking fear that he was alone in a vast field with 5 of the enemy and no one around to hear him scream. Dietrich ignored the command, or perhaps the language barrier was too thick, and he bent down, grabbing the end of the wire with a confidence that looked dangerously like aggression to the old farmer's paranoid eyes. He's going to cut it, Silas thought, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He's going to ruin the only wire I have left just to spite me, or maybe he's going to use it to strangle me right here. The German soldier pulled a length of the sharp wire, ignoring the barbs biting into his skin, and placed it against the standing wooden post, his face unreadable, his eyes focused intensely on the metal. Silas took a jagged step forward, raising the wrench, his muscles coiled to strike, ready to defend his property, ready to crush the saboteur who dared to mock his helplessness in the middle of a failed harvest. But then Dietrich did something that made Silas freeze in his tracks, his breath catching in his dusty throat, his eyes widening in total, paralyzed confusion. Dietrich didn't cut the wire. Instead, he looped it around the post and began to manipulate it with his bare hands, twisting the metal with a strange, fluid motion that Silas had never seen in 40 years of farming. He took a loose piece of scrap wire, bent it into a tight U-shape, and then threaded it through the main loop, using the leverage of the fence against itself to create a tension point. The sound of metal grinding against metal filled the silence, a screeching, biting noise that sounded like a weapon being loaded, making Silas's instinct to strike scream in his head, telling him this was a trap. "Stop it." "You're ruining the tension," Silas screamed, the words exploding out of him. But Dietrich just looked up, a small trickle of bright red blood running down his thumb where a barb had sliced him, with one final, grunt-inducing twist of his wrists. Dietrich locked the wire against the post, creating a perfect, unbreakable figure-8 knot that held the barbed strand tight against the wood without a single nail or staple. Silas lowered the wrench slowly, stepping closer, his eyes tracing the intricate geometry of the knot. A piece of engineering genius, born from the absolute scarcity of the Eastern Front, where supplies never arrived. It was the German wire trick, a method used by Wehrmacht soldiers who had run out of everything but their wits. A survival skill now transported across the ocean to save an American farm from ruin. Dietrich wiped his bloody hand on his faded trousers, looked at the stunned farmer with a tired, human expression, and simply pointed to the next post, waiting for the command to help again. That complex little knot didn't just hold the fence, it shattered the wall of prejudice between them, proving that beneath the uniform and the propaganda, there was just a man trying to fix something broken. This is a true story inspired by historical records of the ingenuity found in POW camps across the Midwest. Do you agree that creativity is the universal language that transcends war? Tell us in the comments, and follow for more stories.